was reading this interview, and I think Eric told you about this interview I was reading with you in Stereo Review.
Yes.
And there was this great thing where you started talking about entertaining is like teaching. It's not that different.
He told me all about that, and he told me about the outgrowth of that little discussion that you all had too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I don't know if this is the time to talk about it or not, but
Click. Hold on one second. There we go.
got it.
Got it.
Yeah. Yet I had an experience as a teacher which lasted for about 7 years roughly. Actually, I was 19 when I started teaching. I finished college very, very early. Went to Howard University when I was 15 on a scholarship. And I've always been a very feisty kind of musician in terms of my confidence. You know, I've always felt that what I knew about music, I knew about music. So teaching was an easy thing for me. When I was in junior high school and high school, I very often substituted in a very casual, loose way for the music teacher. If she had to leave the classroom, she'd say, "Roberta, take over." And there was never any dealing with lesson plans or anything. I just continued to do whatever it was she had done and developed the lesson in my own sort of natural way.
I remember when that would happen when I was in school, though, that whoever took over, the class would get really rowdy. Did you learn some discipline then, too, about how to keep
them? Yeah, but I mean, I was really into the music. And the only thing that we would do, sometimes I would be tempted by, my classmates to go away from the lesson and play something, but it would still be a learning process. I mean, of course, I didn't know that then. I was having fun too. But my point is that we would do a lot of 3- and 4-part harmony singing, because that was very, very popular in the black schools at that time. And we might leave the lesson or the song that the teacher had started, which could have been any number of things that we were or were not interested in, or the class was not interested in, and they'd say, "Roberta, play so and so and so and so. See the pyramids along the Nile." Patty Page would sing. If it was an all-girls class, that was a big thing to do 4-part harmony with the girls, and they'd come around the piano and I'd continue, and the teacher would come in and we'd scatter and everybody'd get back, and she'd say, "All right, now let's get back to this." But that was positive. I mean, we weren't wasting time. There weren't any eraser fights that I had to discipline or anything like that. I was a very serious musician. All of my life I can think of at no point in my life when I wasn't serious about music, or my involvement with it. So there was no space to fool around with me, as a music person, teacher or otherwise.
So when you started teaching, were you teaching music?
Yeah, I started teaching. Actually, my first job as a teacher, I was hired as an English teacher for Farmville, North Carolina, because they didn't have money allocated in the budget for, the arts, music, any kind of drama classes.
Was this the famous $2,800 a year job?
Yes. That was what it was. That was a lot of money to me then, though. You must know that, because I was still living at home with my folks. My folks were still living in Virginia, and I didn't need a lot of money. I mean, it was a lot of money, and it was a tremendous kind of thing for me to go there and have that be my first teaching experience, as opposed to going right into the Washington school system, because I was so young. Now, I was prepared from the standpoint of what I had absorbed as a student, at the college level. I knew what I knew. I knew how to teach. I'd passed all of those teaching classes, the practice teaching classes. I'd done very well with that. But when it came down to applying all of that, this was really good. I taught students, a number of them who were my age or older, for various reasons. They were older, and that kind of contact as a first teaching experience was just invaluable. I mean, and then I had to use my imagination just tremendously with those.
You had to dream things up and
Please,
synthesize, right?
yes, and make it work, because it was not the most important thing as far as the school system was concerned, and I mean, the music and art and physical ed classes were not the most important, and they never are, at the secondary education level. And it was the most important thing in my life, and it was the thing that I did. I knew that I could teach a basic English lit class, but I also knew that I excelled as a musician, and that for these particular students, I could probably be just tremendously influential in helping them to do a lot of things, helping them to want to learn any and everything, because I could give them make a connection with them with music that would, sort of spawn off into other things. And they needed that. I mean, most of them had to work, and they tied tobacco and, dealt with peanuts and cotton and stuff like that. And although I was born in the South, I never had to deal with that, but I could relate to it. And I was young enough so that the language that they spoke, I understood. And
that's really important a lot of times now.
Very important. And it was great for me. It was perhaps the most rewarding teaching experience I ever had. Outside in a classroom situation, I've had some one-on-one goodies that were real special for me. But that classroom situation in Farmville, North Carolina, was really great for me.
Didn't you have to improvise instruments? Because I think I read that there was no piano there.
No, there was a piano there. I think we wound up buying a piano. I did a concert.
Didn't you have an auto harp or something?
We had auto harp. There were no pianos in the room. See, it was what they call, I think, a coordinated school. It's been so long. I think that was the word they used, coordinated. But what that translated into was that all of the black students in the community went to this one school. And as the music teacher and as a young person who didn't feel any pains about walking around through the halls anyway and being on my feet all day, I had the responsibility of teaching all of those children in that school. And it was a rotating kind of thing. And so I taught a lot of the elementary classes, with an auto harp or without anything at all. I mean, just, my own pitch in my head, not even a pitch pipe. And it took a lot of imagination. But then I would only see these students maybe once every 2.5 weeks, or something like that, some weird kind of scheduling thing, because there were about 1,300 kids there, give or take a few. And I got around to seeing all of those kids, And then I had students who came to me, but mainly the students who came to me for English classes. They came and sat in my room and we taught English, but I did not have a piano in my room, in my classroom. The piano was in the auditorium. And I did a lot of things. I gave a classical music concert within the first 3 or 4 months there to raise money to get a piano. And I think we eventually got a piano. I'm not sure. I don't remember. I think we wound up getting a secondhand grand piano. I had very lofty ideas, too. You must understand that. I felt that everybody should be exposed to Bach and Handel and the great masters of music, of vocal music, oratorio and stuff like that. And when I was a student in junior high and high school, there was always this chance once a year to compete, in these choral festivals. And this particular school had not been able to deal with the choral festival because they had not had a choir director or whatever. So in addition to my regular classes, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I also had choir rehearsals. And I would get up in the morning and have choir rehearsal, and then I'd go back in the evening at 6 or 7 o'clock, and we'd have a choir rehearsal with the older students, and we got them ready to enter the competition. And it was it was very rewarding. They really were very good and very kind to me, the students as well as the faculty.
Do you ever hear back from any of your own
Yes,
students?
and that's the good part about it, because a lot of the kids that I taught then have gone on, of course, to bigger and greater things. They've gotten their own degrees and they're teaching, and they've moved away from North Carolina, and they ventured out into the world. I don't say that I was responsible for that, but I'm sure seeing a little 19-year-old black person down there with my energy and with my sort of kind of way of doing things musically must have had a lot of influence on those people, and they've said to me that it did. And they've gone on. A couple of them made basketball teams. They finished school, which was the important thing.
Yeah.
They finished school, which was the important thing. At the time that I was there, I was staying with a woman who was in her late 70s and who went out 3 days a week and tied tobacco from 6 o'clock in the morning until 6 in the evening, and I think she made $4 a day. Well, that was the kind of thing that a lot of these people in this community now, I don't know what happened in Wilson or Greenville or the big towns, but in this community, it seemed to me that was what they had to look forward to. And when I came in there with my energy, and I'm black and I'm basic, I was born in the South, and I was still young. I was still very attached to my Southern roots, my grandmother, my mother, my father, and but I had something else, which they had not probably thought about getting, and if they had, they'd probably thought it would be a lot more difficult than it actually was for them. A lot of them moved north you know, and pursued their education and went on to teach and got music degrees. And, you know, I had one or two good piano students there in Farmville who were very special. I did a lot now that I think of it. I taught piano privately, and, you know, I sort of dropped my little character influence wherever I could without people setting it up and without even setting it up myself. I just was a musician. I was a music teacher, and I taught privately. I went to people's homes. I organized a cheerleading squad because it was a musical thing, you know, and it was rhythmic, and I could do it really easy. And I had the choir, and I had all of the kids, you know, as music students. So I'm sure that, you know, that time in my life, as important as it was for me in terms of my further development as a person and as a musician, that it made an impact there, you know, and that a lot of people were, you know, sort of kind of improved in terms of what they were looking for.
Now, years later, when you've got albums out, you're doing concerts, do you still feel like a teacher in terms of the way you handle yourself on stage, the material you pick, the messages in the songs, the way you present them?
I do, and it's easier for me to feel like a teacher than it is for me to feel anything else. It's easy because that was my first experience. It has always been my first experience to impart my musical knowledge. I mean, that takes a lot of confidence because there are a lot of schools of music out here. I mean, in terms of the way people approach music theory and the teaching of theory and music history too. But I always felt that I knew what I knew, and so that to get on the stage and to sing a song in very much the same way that I would sing it if I was sitting in a classroom was always very easy for me, and that's the way I've maintained my presentation on the stage. Now I get up from the piano, but I did that, you know, when I was teaching classes, music classes too. I would say basically that my approach as an entertainer is the same, with some obvious differences. The lighting, the sound amplification, echo or to echo or not echo, you know, to digital delay or not. You don't have those choices in the classroom. But somehow in my head, when I was in the classroom and I would be performing little things, I always heard those gorgeous sounds and those embellished things behind me anyway. My imagination led me to that. I mean, I could never sit down and just deal with the piano as an isolated instrument unless I was doing something that was specifically designed for the piano, some classical piano music, Bach, Chopin, or somebody like that. But when it came to my creative experience, it was always a total thing for me. And so it's easy, you know, for me to sit down and to do that in a classroom or to do it on the stage. And my approach basically is the same. I mean, it is. Of course, it makes a difference when people applaud. I mean, it takes you out of that momentary trance that you're in or that little trip that you've just been on yourself, you know.
Reminds you where you are, huh?
Yeah. And that makes you aware. I mean, all of a sudden you become very self-conscious, you know. Is my bra strap showing, you know, is my hair still, my lipstick on my teeth, you know. But for the time that I'm actually performing the song, I have the same attitude that I had when I used to do it in my own little apartment, and I had a student there that I was demonstrating how to sing a German art song, Lieder, how to do Schubert versus Hugo Wolf or somebody, and there's a difference, you know. And I would always close my eyes and always get into that particular thing, and I would become transfixed, and that was the way to teach, you know, and it is also the way that I perform. And as I said, I don't come out of that until, you know, somebody brings me out of it.
What about the songs you select in terms of teaching, you know, songs like From Go Up Moses to Independent Man? Do you look at songs and say, what information is this going to, you know, what knowledge can I give to people through a song?
Yes. Well, musically, being a musician is a tremendously, I mean, there's just no end to what you can get out of it personally. You know, you can always justify anything. Stockhausen, ding, dong, boom, boom, you know, people making music with telephone wires, calling that a pitch, you know, dropping cigarettes in the ashtrays and identifying that pitch. I mean, you know, music is completely fascinating when you know something about the scientific.
Percussion instrument.
Yes, you see what I'm saying? That's exactly it. Or any number. Listen, you know, I mean, it's just wonderful the way people can do that. But when I'm singing a song, there are two things that I deal with on the stage, and that is, well, three things. First of all, in terms of what I expect people to get out of it, I want them to understand exactly what it is that I am singing, singing about. And I'd like the end result to be pleasing, to please them. In the middle of that is another kind of self-gratification thing that I'm involved with, so that sometimes it's not the words, it's the music, it's the melody, as is the case with Independent Man. That melody just got to me. I couldn't leave it alone. Those words can never compare to the lyrics of First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, But melodically, it was great, and it also had a pulse that was like what's happening around us today musically. Music is faster, and that's the pulse. The pulse of music, in a big sense, dictates the pulse of one's life, and particularly in this country, because we get up to music, we work to music, we go to bed to music, we wake up to music. I mean, it's constant. We go out to hear music, we go out to buy music, we turn the television on, there's we're surrounded by it. And so I think that it's ridiculous as a performer. I mean, as a scientific musician, I could make my selection and say, I'm not going to deal with this over here. I won't deal with disco. I won't deal with the R&B. I won't deal with this. I'm going to be a classical pianist, and I will only play Mozart. I'm not even going to bother with Chopin. That's not my thing. I could be that selective. But as a person who is immersed and involved in the totality of what music represents, too, as I am, because I turn the TV on and I play my tapes and I dance and I'm involved. Sometimes I am able to get a song that just merely taps a certain part of that pulse, or just taps the pulse. It may tap the pulse and have great lyrics. It may tap the pulse and have great rhythm. It may tap the pulse and have a great overall sensitive thing, that I just can't define. A girl wrote me a song once called "And If I Remember You Right," and she sang it for me. I tell you who she is. She's the star of Eight Is Enough. Her name is Betty Buckley. She's a very talented lady, and the song is, she played it for me on the guitar and sang it herself. Beautiful. And I tried my best to do that song several other ways, It would only work when it was a voice and guitar performance, And my whole point is that I may decide to do that song, but I won't decide to do it because it fits into any specific category that maybe some other people will look for. The little thing in between satisfying the people, getting them involved, dealing with whatever it is that they want, and the other thing, and in the middle of that is my own little self-gratification thing, which I have to have. Independent Man and that other song that you named are good examples of that. I mean, they were songs that I selected purely and simply because they got to something in me. I didn't expect them to be able to give it up and have people say, my God, what a great song. They're not. I mean, I know that, and if they sold zillions, I would still know that.
There's a big difference between teaching and preaching, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that as a performer, you're in a better position if you can do a little of both. If you can do a little of both. It's almost having a combination of science and soul. You can't, do it without having some of both. You can do it with soul, but eventually that wears thin because soul, the definition of soul as it relates to music, continues to change. Scientifically, there are some theories about music that are constant. And if you have that, and you can add the soulful experiences and sort of integrate them in it, then you can do a song like Independent Man. I can do Independent Man in slow version of that and make somebody cry. Maybe not the world in general, but I could do it because I feel that, Yeah.
The thought I had about that was just flew out of my mind, so it probably was not all that important.
Well, I talk a lot, so you have to stop me, and I occasionally, being a creative person, will say one thing and think of what the end of the phrase or the paragraph is that I'm going to say and miss my way along the middle.
I remember what it was. It has something to do with, particularly with what you were saying, particularly after you become really established.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost, it gives you more opportunity to do those kind of things that you mentioned. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What was your question, though?
I think it was just an observation.
Observation. That after you get, yeah, it does. But then you have to be very careful because the business end of the thing, requires that you temper. Is that the word? That you temper that part of you that makes it possible for you to do what you want to once you become established. That you temper that with a keen awareness of what it is people want to hear. That's the business end of the deal. I mean, I'm not interested in recording and having my stuff shelved. I really want it out there, and I want the whole thing, just like anybody else does. The thing that puzzles me is that we have not allowed music in any form, classical or otherwise, to develop to the point that art has. I mean, painting and drawing and even graphics, Nobody questions the fact that Picasso went through several periods, his blue period, his red period, his white period, or whatever. They don't question it. They don't say, well, why is he doing reds now? I mean, please, why can't, why doesn't he do the whites? They somehow accept his work on a very open kind of basis, and they either like it or they don't like it. If they like it, it sells, But it all has value. It all has value because it represents what he's actually feeling. And somehow with artists, even the classical artists, I mean, they give you little parameters that you have to sort of operate inside of. And if you venture out of that, if you, for instance, are Joan Sutherland, and you try to do Carmen, I mean, the critics will slay you because Joan Sutherland is coloratura and cannot do Carmen. And by the same token, if you are black or white and you're trying to do, if you're black and you do a country and western song, you can just be crucified for that very badly. And if you're white and you try to get too black, or you're not black enough, they just seem to put such funny kind of stamps on it, and I'm wondering if we'll ever break out of that, if you'll ever really be able to develop, if there'll only be one Stevie Wonder and one Paul Simon and one somebody else like that. I can't even think of anybody who has that kind of latitude when it comes to being allowed to create what they want to create and to give it up that way. I mean, and knowing that people are going to accept it because it's Stevie Wonder. They may not like the song, but they will accept it because it's him. And yet they expect me or Aretha or Linda Ronstadt to fall into certain kinds of categories. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I'm making my point.
Yeah, it's very strange because you're talking about a medium, an art form in which people don't see, they listen. And so to go into all those categories that you were mentioning.
Yes, but it's art in its purest form. I mean, as an artist, you know what I'm saying? Dylan is an example of a person who may be questioned in terms of why he chose to change, his original version of Just Like a Woman, why he's trying to sing pitches rather than talk through things now, and people are complaining about that. But it's accepted because he's Dylan, and if Stevie does something, it's accepted because he's Stevie. But if another kind of musician, myself or Linda or somebody like that, Dolly Parton ventures into another area. I mean, she can sing anything. She's got the voice. She can sing anything. I mean, really, and it's going to be good. The only thing that we want is for it to be good. But she should not be limited to singing country and western or a certain type of country and western. And I'm just saying that because a lot of that has to do with what people actually hear on an album as opposed to what one wants to do, as an established person. I can do what I want to do, but I still am belabored with, what it is that people want to hear and what the record company, in fact, will release on me.
So it's easier now for you to slip in some of that stuff. I mean, it's easier in a disco world if you want to slip in that song you're talking about with just a guitar and your voice, and it will be listened to.
It'll be listened to, but it won't be played and it won't be promoted or packaged.
At least you get to do it.
Yeah, you do get to do it. But, artists are egotistical too. We want our art to be important, And to be important, it has to be heard, and in my case, or listened to, or seen in the case of somebody who's painting, you know. And it's kind of funny. It's really funny because it's a really big business. Excuse me.
Real good. Can we go back into your southern roots that you were talking about, figure out how you got here and what you're doing in West McMarty?
Yes. Well, what specifically do you want to know? Oh, I promised you a Perrier, and it's sitting over here getting warm.
Okay.
Let me do that. We're talking about my southern roots, huh?
Yeah.
Well, you probably know all the typical biographical information about where I was born and stuff like that. I was born in North Carolina, and we moved to Virginia, to Arlington, Virginia, when I was about 4. And
Was it a big family?
big family, 5 kids, and big because we all stayed in one little place. Actually, when we moved to Virginia, we moved up with my grandmother and my aunt and my uncle and another aunt and her daughter and another cousin of an uncle. You know, I mean, it was like a big, and we were all in the basement of somebody else's house. So it was a big family, not a big immediate family. I only had 4, you know, sisters and brothers, but my mother, my father, all of us, and we were all there.
You didn't have to worry about finding somebody to talk to.
No, or being cold, really, because, you know, you slept, a lot of folks slept in the bed. All the kids slept in the bed together, you know. And
What about music?
music, my mother was a church organist, and I have a very strong recollection, probably before I was 4, because I remember moving to Virginia, coming up. I remember that whole experience. I do remember being placed on the organ beside my mother. I even remember what I wore, this particular memory that I have. I remember the dress that I had on and the little blue sweater with the hole in it right over here, and my hair, you know, being parted, and a plait right here and 2 plaits down here. I remember that, and I remember my fascination with the organ. I was the baby then of the family, and my mother kept me there, you know, right by her side, and I wanted to play. I started playing the piano, really playing the piano when I was about 6, 5 or 6, you know.
Was there a piano around? Did you have to...
There was no piano around. This was in the Sunday school. By the time I was 9, I was playing piano for the Sunday school, which is amazing. I was always sort of kind of thrown in with the older kids. I was real smart as a young person, real smart, and very bookish, you know, and reading a lot and talking and dealing with things on a level that, you know, where it was at least 2 or 3 grades ahead of me. By the time I was 9, I was in the 6th grade. I had skipped a lot of grades, and my mother sent me to school in Washington, D.C. before they passed the tuition law thing. That was a very wonderful thing, you know, because the schools in Virginia were not nearly as good, and they were little country schools.
Was it scary at first, though, to go to big city schools, or was it a big challenge?
It scared me.
Yeah.
It was the same school that Amy Carter went to when they moved her here, Stevens Elementary. It scared me, but I was prepared to deal with it. I was very into the books, very into grades, you know, very into music, and it was very exciting, and it did frighten me.
When you started playing the piano for the first time, you know, first few times, did it feel really natural to you? Did you feel this is it, this is my instrument, this is me?
Well, I felt very comfortable. I never thought of doing anything else, and from the time I was about, I guess, 9 or 10, I used to close my eyes and hear music that I would then try to play. You know, I mean, I have very strong recollections of what it felt like. I can't remember the melodies, but I can remember this tremendously euphoric feeling, you know, of being able to close my eyes and sitting there and imagine myself moving, you know, back and forth and hearing these melodies and playing them on the piano. I do recall that. Then by the time I was, I guess maybe 11 or 12, I had my first real piano teacher. My mother had been working with me up until that point. And This was at the doing of the superintendent of my Sunday school, a lady named Mrs. Hightower, who had the money and wanted to see that I got, a better shot at it. So she arranged for me to study with a lady who had worked at Howard University. And that was a big thrill for me. And I would get on the bus, in the streetcar, and go to her house once a week and have this incredible piano lesson. And she had all of the, best students. People, were just playing things that I had never heard before. And I was really challenged by that. And it sort of opened up, things for me. And
Were you singing then too?
not really. Singing was a very secondary thing with me until I really stopped teaching school. Singing was secondary. Even when I started dealing with singing in a more serious vein, I think my senior year at Howard, or the year, maybe I was about, 19 or 20. So at the end of that first year, my first year of teaching, I came back to Washington, and I hooked up with a friend of mine who was studying with a man who had taught voice at Howard University. And I did that because I just wanted to play. But my thing was playing. I accompanied vocal students, in this man's studio, which got me into opera. And I had studied opera, little smattering of, had a little voice at Howard University. As a matter of fact, I finished Howard as a combination music ed major, voice major. No, music ed major with vocal supervision. That's what it was called. Before that, I had majored 3 years in piano, and then it became very clear to me that I was not going to be hired as a concert pianist, or do anything like that. I had no idea what was happening, and I had to get some education courses. And I did not want to teach the tuba or, the flute or the violin. So I had to go into vocal supervision. Well, in order to get all of that done in a year, they said if you do a vocal concert at the end of the year that is comparable to a voice major's, will give you your degree in music ed vocal supervision, because the only thing I had not done was had the 4 years of voice. And as a voice minor, music ed major at Howard, you only had to take maybe one class a year, one course a year, in voice. So I knew enough about voice, to feel like I could do that, and I just changed my major. And at the end of my senior year, I gave a voice recital that was like a graduate recital in voice, including the aria. I did Vuelo Sapete from, what is that from? I can't even think of what it's from, but I did the aria, I did the early Italian songs, and I did the German, leader group, and closed with the Negro spirituals with the aria in between. So it was like a full voice recital, same thing that a voice major would do. And they gave me my degree. So I had started being involved with voice at that point. And when, of course, I went south to teach, my thing was not instruments as a teacher, but voice. So I was beginning to develop, this interest in singing. When I went back to Washington after that first year teaching in Farmville, I got a job in an opera restaurant.
What's an opera restaurant?
An opera restaurant, I don't know if they have one here. I know they used to have one in San Francisco called Margarita's, I think. But an opera restaurant then was a place where people paid very little money to get in, and they served them moderate to reasonably good Italian food, and gave them lots of Italian students singing Italian operas and arias. And my job was to accompany these people, and in between the arias, like a set would include maybe, let's say, 4 or 5 arias by 4 or 5 different people. And I would play all of this. A lot of sight reading was involved. And in between the songs, I would play my own little thing, and I would improvise. And I would, because piano, again, was still my main thing. And not until 1968 did I even think about singing anything publicly. And that was because it was Christmas. They were getting ready to sell this restaurant. It was a gay old time. I had been working there for like 4 or 5 years maybe, from 7 to 12, moonlighting every night, and loving it. And I had created a following, but as an accompanist. There were several accompanists there. One was Martin Katz, who works now for the best singers in the business. He works with Marilyn Horne a lot and people like that, big. But he majored in accompanying, I think, at Catholic University. I didn't. I just sort of kind of came by it naturally, and it was something that I wanted to do because I could not be a concert pianist. I realized that I didn't have the discipline, I didn't have the background, I didn't have the teaching experience. I mean, I wasn't exposed to that kind of teaching experience to get me ready for that.
It's a rough world to get into.
Rough world, and you couldn't. There's no way you could leave Howard University and go to the stage. You know, maybe go from Howard to Juilliard or Howard to Curtis if you were lucky enough, but not from Howard University to a concert stage. And of course, right, and you don't realize that until it's too late. I mean, you know, the opera.
Can I ask you interject one question?
Yes.
Were you the kind of student and player who was so into classical that you kind of looked down your nose at pop music?
No, I didn't look down my nose at pop music. I just made that selection. That's what the scientific knowledge of music does for you. It's so much more interesting than popular music. You know what I'm saying? It's so much more challenging than popular music.
Did you pay attention to pop music? Were you like listening to what was going on?
I listened to it all. And I grew up in a family of musicians. My brother sang, my two sisters sang, my mother, you know. My father played stride piano and sang. My uncle played tremendous stride piano. I mean, he thought he was Fats Waller. He could only play one or two things, and both of them in the same key, you know. But, I mean, it really was very, very, very good at that. And so I, you know, of course, and they weren't playing the classics, you know. I was playing the classics. But, no, I didn't look down on it.
There was this impression in your biographical material that until your opera teacher, whoever said try pop, that you...
He never even said try pop. What he said...
Is that story...
No, the story is inaccurate, and I've tried to correct it, but I guess the real story is not as sensational, Alan.
Well, for 2 million listeners now, we will correct the story.
Here's the situation. This is the same man whose studio I started working in between my 19th and 20th year, okay, as an accompanist for his vocal students. I got a house on Douglas Street in Northeast Washington and moved away from my mother and stuff, and I had several roomers. Now, that was a very popular thing to do, to get a house if you could, you know, afford to rent a house and rent out rooms. And I had one of the people who was renting from me was the same girl who had introduced me to Mr. Wilkerson, who was the voice teacher. And Wilkie eventually had some problems and came to stay with me and was teaching in my house. I was teaching school and he would teach there during the day. Nina Simone was very popular then. Very popular. That's when she did I Don't Want Him, You Can Have Him. You know, and everybody in the world, you know, especially young black people my age, were playing Nina Simone's record. And I would sit down and play. I could play anything and do anybody. And he said to me, yelled down the steps and said, if you're going to sing, you got to do it right. I don't care what it is you're going to sing. If you're going to sing that stuff, you've got to do it right. And he never said to me, try pop. He said to me, I think he, as a matter of fact, is the person who has perpetuated this story. And I've asked him about it. And, of course, he always denies that he's been misunderstood. But what he said to me was, you know, if you're going to do that, do your own thing. Find your own niche and develop it, you know. And he gave me this lecture on how well prepared Nina Simone was and how I should be just as prepared. There was no excuse, you know, and he was very right about that. But that was very early, and I was still teaching school, and I had no idea I never thought about singing publicly. I did a lot of singing of popular music for friends when I would be at a place. I mean, it was nothing. One of the things that I really got out of my college years as a music student was the ability to go in and play or sing in front of a lot of people who could also play and sing. And so there was a lot of showing off, you know. You know what I'm saying? And if it was an opera situation and, you know, and I'd played the same aria for 20 people, then it took nothing for me to say to the person I was playing for, that's wrong. This is supposed to be this, or the Peters edition allows you to do this, or something. Somebody else's version says you can do that. You cannot confuse this. You have to do this cadenza if you're going to do. And I could give up that kind of information. And he was simply saying to me, make a choice, and if that's going to be your choice, then find your own thing. After he said that to me, I continued to teach classical piano, and I taught classical. I was a classical voice coach. I mean, you know, and that sort of thing. So there was never at no point in my life did someone, and especially my voice teacher, say to me, try pop. No. My efforts to try pop were completely and totally something that evolved I had worked at the Tivoli Opera Restaurant, as I said, for 5 years or so. And the man was selling the place. And I knew he was selling the place. And I wanted to do something. So the summer of '68, I said, I'm going to find a job. I didn't want to teach on the playground. I didn't want to teach in the recreation department, which is what music teachers usually did, because there were only a few spaces for music teachers in the summer school program, and naturally the teachers with the longer tenure, who've been there the longest, got those jobs. And I wanted to do something. I was married then to a musician, a jazz musician, and I felt a little freer. So I went out and looked for some jobs. And the first job I got was at a place called 1520 Club, which was like a strip joint, basically. And there was a piano there, and I sang, before the people came on to do their numbers or whatever that was. And then I disappeared.
What was it like working in a strip joint?
Well, I never saw it. And the people who came to see me were sort of the people who finished work and stopped by this place before it really got into what it was going to do. And I was there at that time, and there were a lot of business people, a lot of serious people who wanted to hear the kind of music I could do. I'd play Gershwin and intersperse it with Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. I'd end everything with Full Moon and Empty Arms. I could do that and show off, make that run down the thing. And they loved it. It was flattering. It was complimentary to me, too, and it made me feel good. So I developed that. Now,
it also probably got you a chance to work with a different kind of audience.
Right, and then I started singing. The first thing I did for these people was Up, Up and Away. And I loved that song. I thought it was so cute, and they loved it, and they wanted to get into something. So I started singing that, and I worked out a little vocal version of that. And then things started to grow. The first time I realized that I had something really special, the lady who was running the strip joint, and her name, she was a former strip dancer, a big one named Tinkerbell. And Tinkerbell came to me and asked me if she could manage me. And I said, manage what? I'm a school teacher. And she said, well, I think you've got a career. I said, oh, no. I'm going to go back and teach, in September. Well, I didn't go back and teach in September. It's real strange because it happened real fast. I left her place because somebody came into the 1520 Club. One of the guys who had waited tables at the Tivoli Opera Restaurant said to me, listen, Mr. Henry is buying this place and blah, 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 and he's got a club up on Capitol Hill, and they have brunch there. You ought to see if you can work there. This place is nothing for you. You work there and, your people would be there. So I went to Mr. Henry and auditioned. He said, you're hired. He hired me right away. I left the 1520 Club. I didn't even give him any notice because it wasn't that kind of thing. I started working at Mr. Henry's on Sundays from 2 to 6, and I started with Up, Up and Away, and First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, and certain little things like that I had done in the classroom anyway, with the kids, and sort of developed them, and that's really, how I made that transition from being a person totally involved in classical music and in teaching, whatever the study guide said that you were supposed to teach junior high school students, from being that kind of musician and a choir director on Thursdays and somebody who played and directed the choir on Sunday. That's what I was doing until that summer of '68. And in that little bit of time, from June, when school was out in June, by September of '68, Henry had offered me a job. I was already I had gone from working Sundays to working 5 days a week. And he had begun to tear down walls and rebuild this upstairs room, and it was all so exciting. And he had offered me, something like $200 a week, I think, for working 6 nights a week, and he was going to pay me enough to pay the bass player. And that's how I made that decision. I never looked back. That was the real transition for me, that I had this fortunate time in the summer of '68 to start at the 1520 Club out of sheer not wanting to teach on the rec in the rec department or on the playground or whatever that was. I got that, and it was nothing, but I had a husband who was taking care of me. I didn't have to worry about it. I just wanted to do something so I wouldn't go bananas. And I had my private piano students, my private voice students, all of that all through there. But by the end of that summer, before September came around, as a matter of fact, I had already gone down to the school board and talked with somebody there that I knew to ask their advice. And their advice was, listen, you're doing very well. I don't know what it's going to mean for you, but you're young. Take the chance.
I was going to ask you if people were trying to talk you out of it, because you always hear that a lot. Don't try it.
My husband was the only one who tried to talk me out of it.
Really?
Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, I think that sort of kind of halfway began the dissolution of our relationship as a married couple, because he was is a musician, excellent jazz musician, and at that time was working with Roland Kirk. And just did not want. He was afraid. I was very naive about a lot of things. All of my life, as a young person, I had developed this tremendous social thing in terms of music and musicians and musical events and stuff. But I had not ventured into anything stronger than smoking cigarettes. And he was just afraid that I would get out there and be sucked into that, and that I wouldn't even get a chance to maintain my, this thing that I had worked for 22 or 23 years as a studied, trained musician. He just saw it being dissipated and totally wiped out. And I, of course, knew that that wouldn't happen, because there's no way I could not practice, and no way I could not, keep all of this stuff that I had worked so hard together, and we sort of kind of split, but at that point. But I never felt any pressures from anybody about making a choice. The choice was made completely and totally as a result of things that happened, that evolved. You know what I'm saying? When I got ready to tell my husband that I would do it, it wasn't a matter of, well, it's me or your music. I said, it wasn't even up for discussion. You can't ask me not to be something that I obviously am. And you just have to trust my intelligence and my intuition to lead me in the right direction, and to allow me to make the right choices. But I was going to perform. I knew that. Once I had tasted that, there was no way I could not go out there and give it all I had. Just no way. From working with a tambourine with a hole in it around my foot as my only percussion support to having a bass player was a tremendous thrill for me. Musically, it just opened up.
I guess for a lot of people I know that the choices, that there really are no choices in a way. It's like being in a maze, and there's only one way out for each person.
Right.
And you can go through a blocked out section of the maze and be pounding and trying to knock it down.
It won't work. That's right. But I feel real fortunate, whenever I have a conversation like this, I think of how really, sort of predestined, or whatever other word is appropriate, this whole thing has been for me, because I really have not had to ponder a lot about it or make heavy decisions, or, it's just been a matter of being prepared and feeling good, being healthy, and getting out there and doing it.
There were a lot of famous people driving by that club too, weren't there?
Yeah, there were a lot of famous people who dropped by and who sort of spread the word. Carmen McRae, Bill Cosby, Ramsey Lewis, Al Hibbler. Musicians that I had idolized, since I was a little teeny-weeny kid. And they would all involve themselves in what we were doing there, which was really interesting. Burt Bacharach, there was one amazing night when Burt Bacharach's, when David Merrick's production of Promises was opening in Washington at the National. And they had been there, I think, for 2 or 3 nights, and they came. All of them came. Harold Wheeler was the rehearsal accompanist for that show. And he and I had been at Howard together. He's an excellent, excellent musician, just an exquisite piano player. And, he had come to the club, and I asked him to sit in, as I did everybody that I recognized as a musician. That was just a thing. And he did, a little reluctantly, but he wound up playing his little booty off. And he was so elated with that. He says, I'm going to bring these people back here tomorrow. And he did. Here, up the steps comes David Merrick and Burt Bacharach and Hal David and all of the cast, And I, of course, pulled out all of the Burt Bacharach, Hal David songs I had in my head, even some I didn't know, and just 13-minute versions of House Is Not a Home. Little things where I would intersperse little themes, whatever that was that he would recognize. And I had that ability, to sort of kind of entertain people, I guess, at all levels. I wasn't afraid. I never felt like, there's Carmen McRae out there, I better not sing. Carmen came up and sat on the piano beside me and told me to keep my eyes open. She said, if you're going to play the piano, keep your eyes open. That was great advice. It was great.
It's got to be great to entertain people who entertained you for so long.
Sure. And to play for Eartha Kitt. I played for Eartha Kitt one time. She probably doesn't remember it. But that was a thrill, and the only way I could do that was to have been prepared. That's what I'm saying about, the evolution of this thing. I think it's been because I was prepared. This was at that wonderful march on the White House when Dr. King was still alive, and all those people were encamped down there on the monument grounds, and I was playing at Mr. Henry's, and so that would mean it would have been 68. Yeah, 68. And, or 69. No, it must have been 68.
Just called 68.
68, right. Right. And there was nobody there to play for these people. And I played for most of them. I played for Eartha. I played for somebody else. Was it Sidney Bechet? Somebody else. I don't remember. But lots of people, You can't do that unless you're prepared. And it was those hours of scales and studies, Czerny studies, and all of that stuff that made me capable, made it possible for me to do all of that.
Now, I'll bet a lot of people said, I'm going to get you a deal and get you out of here, but only one person did it, right?
Right. No, but not a lot of people said that. I think they sort of wanted to keep me there. And then it happened real fast, because I did my first album in 69.
Yeah.
And it sort of happened real fast. It really happened fast. Once I made the move from the classroom to, the club, it just began to happen real fast. And I needed whatever time I had there to develop this thing, That's why First Take has a very natural, never been in the studio before sound. I did it in a day because there was nothing else to do. I just did the songs that I had been doing at Mr. Henry's that whole year. That was the only way to do it. As a matter of fact, the first recording session we did for Atlantic, we did at RCA Victor Studios. I invited several people up from Mr. Henry's. We set them there in the room, and I just did a 3-hour show. Sang 42 songs back to back, and they recorded every one of them.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
That's the truth. That's the truth.
So more complicated overdubs and...
No, just me and my bass player and my drummer. That was it. Les McCann was there. It was good. It all had purpose and meaning. The end result, of course, was that first album with First Time Ever I Saw Your Face on it, which I loved then and still love today.
How'd you find that song?
On a Joe and Eddie album. You remember Joe and Eddie?
I love Joe and Eddie. Does Meeting Here Tonight?
Yes. Well, they did that first, and then Harry Belafonte recorded it. But Joe and Eddie were two of my favorite people, I guess as they were yours, And they had a real strong thing. They used to do a lot of television, remember? Ed Sullivan, and you could see him on TV, and just to see those two guys stand there and sing, whatever it was, had such an impact. And I loved that song. I started dealing with that song when I was still teaching school as a 3-part harmony thing for my junior high school classes. And it was a love song, and it wasn't risque, it wasn't disallowed. It was wonderful. So that's where I started working with it. And when I started singing in the club, I called on those songs that I had worked with the kids, because I was constantly, as a music teacher, trying to find things that they were listening to on the radio that I could teach them in the class. When I got ready to teach them the scale, and the Supremes had dee doo 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 dee dee doo da 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 dee dee da da da, whatever that song. I don't even know if it was the Supremes. Dee doo da 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 dee dee. The Toys. That was a great thing. And they didn't. I mean, the principal, they didn't know. We never performed it in the auditorium, but I mean, the kids loved it because it was popular with them, and we just got to the scale, and it was just a piece of cake. I mean, they just absorbed it real easy, and a couple of other things. And so Up and Away and First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. I'm trying to think of things that stayed in my repertoire when I made the move. Well, there were several songs like that.
What you said about being prepared, especially for the first album, it seems that it's the only chance an artist really gets to have worked a long time in front of an album. It was the first one. By the second one, in between have come tours and promotional things and interviews and lots of other things, and recording is not as leisurely.
Well, I appreciate, the one thing that I appreciate about the years that I worked with Joel Dorn, I couldn't appreciate it when I first became aware of this, though, I must tell you. I'm speaking of the way he kept me from a lot of stuff and kept a lot of stuff from me. I only knew him. I didn't meet Ahmet Ertegun until about 3 years ago. Really. You know, and or maybe 4 years ago now. But I mean, it was a long time after I'd been at Atlantic before I met him. I met him, but I mean, not to sit down and have a conversation about what I was going to do in the studio. You know, just to say hello and keep right on going. Neshui Ertegun I knew because he was in charge of the jazz division of Atlantic Records, and I was considered basically a jazz artist. But I had no dealings with anybody else there. And as far as a producer was concerned, I never even thought of Joel Dorn as a producer in quotes. I thought of him as my friend and as the Atlantic Record representative who was working with me. And he just took care of things, you know, and kept a lot of the hassle so that I could go in. My album, for instance, is it Quiet Fire? I think it's the Quiet Fire album that I went in and did basically one night about 2 o'clock in the morning. I was in love with someone and it wasn't going real well. And I just called him up and said I wanted to go to the studio. He said, what time? I said, I don't know. Sometime I'll call you. I mean, I never thought about, well, you got to book this time. He said, okay, let me know. And I called him and he said, you know, you ready to go? And I said, yeah. He said, I'll meet you there. I got there, everything was set up. I went in and I did Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow, Sweet Bitter Love, Bridge Over Troubled Waters, about 3 more. And they all went on that album, all ballads. But I mean, it was such a gas. I was just, whatever this thing was that I was feeling at that moment, you know, I just put it right on top of the piano and I sang to it and it was wonderful. I didn't think about going back to punch this in or how that sounds or the intonation here. It was all perfect because it was real. And that was a real important experience, and it's hard to get that nowadays in the studios. Even if you're that kind of artist, it's hard to get that because most artists are not like that. Most recording people are not like that, and most producers and executives are not like that either. They have systems and ways that they do things, and it's not that. I mean, they're not willing to take the chance that, you know, 6 songs delivered very emotionally and very really at 2 o'clock in the morning are going to sell, are going to make your album go gold. I didn't think about gold, platinum, blue, green, red, or nothing, you know, then. And I longed for those days, and I thank Joel Dorn for that because he kept that away from me. He never let it get into that. And I'm sure it was always there, but he never let it get into that. Whatever he had to do to keep it, you know, where I was, he used to call me the school teacher. And that's the way he treated me, you know, like I was a little school teacher, and anything that had to do with whatever they do in the studio, smoking grass and whatever. None of that ever happened in my sessions at all. At all. I mean, I never heard him once say to somebody, oh, don't do that, because it never got that far. And I'd go in with no charts or just minimal charts, but I could tell everybody what I wanted them to play anyway because it was coming out of here. Nowadays, you go into the studio and try to do something like that. You know, it's very difficult to get musicians who will put that thing in there for you, you know, because everybody feels like they're where you are, or they want to be where you are, and it's just real hard to do that, you know, to get people to go in.
Say, the technology gets in the way.
Oh yeah.
Eric and I went over to the Hit Factory to see Elliot's session.
Yeah, he told me.
Tuesday night, and I walked over to the drums, and there were 11 mics around the drums, and you think of 7, you know, if you want to come in at 2 in the morning and do something really naturally, you got to set up 11 mics just for the drums.
Right.
You know, you'll forget the feeling by the time it's...
I hate that. I really hate that. Stevie said the other night he wanted to get his own studio. And I used to think that was a real extravagant thing that made no sense at all. But it's not. I mean, all you need is a little 24-track board, you know, and a good room, acoustically sound room, and you can do it all right there. And you can do it when it's comfortable for you and without whatever. You know, I mean, you can have things constantly set. In his case, his Dream Machine and, you know, the various and sundry other keyboards and the synthesizers and everything can be just set right there. His set of drums. You don't have to worry about the drum heads being old, ordering drums and ordering more drums at 2 o'clock in the morning because these are not the right ones and that kind of stuff. It gets to be very frustrating. Well, Joel, the whole point is that Joel kept all of that away from me. He knew exactly what to have for me, and it was always there. I never questioned it.
now you can prepare yourself musically, but is there a way that anyone can prepare themselves for when it hits, like when the first album hit and #1 records and all that?
Well, yes, I don't think that having a #1 record as a musician really gets to you until you have maybe 2 or 3 #1 records. I don't think that you begin to change your way of thinking. At least for me, I didn't change my way of thinking until, let's say, after Killing Me Softly. Then it became impossible to satisfy anybody, you know. Not me, but to satisfy anybody after Killing Me Softly. Meaning the record people. That's when I met all the big wheels, the executives, because all of a sudden I was a platinum artist. And at a time when it wasn't that easy to get platinum, you know, especially with a song like Killing Me Softly. It wasn't R&B, and you know, and I'm black and I hadn't grown up on the Ed Sullivan Show or whatever else that was, and here all of a sudden it is. And the pressures that are presented at that point do take you into that kind of thinking. I mean, all of a sudden you just have to sit down and deal with it as a very real part of what it is you're doing. You're in the record business now, and it's no longer just a matter of creating something or expressing what you have in your head creatively and trusting that people will be able to hear how great it is anyway. You know, I did a song, Stevie wrote a song for me called I Can See the Sun in late December. And it was almost like Killing Me Softly. It was that kind of, you know, thing. And I really loved it. But I never intended to do it as a single. I never thought of it as a single. So I just stretched it out the way I heard it, you know. I took it into a very ethereal thing, and I don't know if you've heard it. It's on my Feel Like Making Love album, and, you know, just really beautiful. When we did it in Australia, the year the album came out, which was in 74, 75, 74, they were impressed to the point that they built a sun, you know, and by the time we had gotten to the peak of the tune, which was basically instrumental, I was really playing jazz piano, I mean, augmented chords for days, you know. I can't even remember what an augmented chord sounds like without getting to the piano. I mean, at that time, I could hear that, you know, and I was playing, so they would do it. So this sun, by the time I got to the peak of this thing, and the girls were singing dee dee dee, that chord, you know, only an octave higher, the sun was behind everybody, huge sun, and they would do it so it would start like this, you know, and then by the time we got to it, this great big enormous sun was there. Well, I mean, you couldn't tell me that music wasn't valid, but nobody at the record company ever heard that tune. They never even heard the part of the tune that could have been used as a single if that's what they wanted. But I didn't do it for that reason anyway. I think that's some of the best music I've been able to put down on record, because it gave me a chance to stretch out, and it wasn't offensive. I mean, it wasn't boring. You don't get tired listening to it. It has a lot of excitement in there, you know, and it's a Stevie Wonder melody, and it gets back to, and it has a little hooky thing too, you know, but it was all of that, you know, and they thought I was completely bananas at the record company. They did very little to promote that album. If it hadn't been for Feel Like Making Love, it probably wouldn't have done anything. They wanted it all to sound like that, or, you know, I guess versions of Killing Me Softly or something. And I could not think or begin to think of just staying in one little niche like that.
It's like they become junkies in a way. They have to have more of the same thing.
I know. People don't want to hear another version of The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. I mean, if there was a great song that said the same thing, different melody, different groove, different flow, it would be a hit, and people would know it, and it wouldn't make any difference whether I recorded it or 9,000 other people did. But to find The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face for my voice, recorded like that, which was deathly slow, you know, at a time when Beatles were almost at their peaking on the way down or whatever, was just one of those musical things that you can't always have. And Killing Me Softly was the same thing. It could have been a hit for a number of people, you know, as it was. The magic of the song and the feeling that I had for it just connected, and it worked that way. Now, I'm still trying to find those little magical things. You know, they're not always willing for you to use your own judgment as to what is magic and what isn't when it comes to the record. Musically, it's okay, but as far as the record is concerned and what's going to sell and what they're going to promote, it's a different story altogether. Really different story altogether. I wonder what's going to happen with the disco thing in me now. I really wonder, because I read on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. I've been reading it in New York about the success of the disco music as an industry, in the business of disco, $8 billion industry now. And that doesn't even include a lot of the little side things, That's big. That's big. Now, how is the record company going to react to me? How are they going to react to the Rolling Stones? I mean, and those people. There will always be a space for the Rolling Stones, but will there always be a space for me? Are they going to be able to deal with me as that kind of creditable contributor to their till? I mean, am I going to be considered worth it? Are they going to promote, my album because it's me and my artistry, whether it has disco on it or not? I'm only going to do something disco if it makes sense.
It's like it was seen by now. I mean, you're right enough. You've been right often enough that they wouldn't question that. But Eric and I were talking about that Saturday night.
Yeah.
In his case, and he doesn't really love disco or anything, but you could become artistry in a position. What do I do?
Yes, precisely. And that's exactly it. What do you do?
Same thing
I mean,
with rock and roll, though. Remember when rock and roll started?
Yeah.
And all the blues singers and the R&B singers started making rock and roll records?
Yeah. And then look at Rod Stewart, who's done a disco thing. Big rock and roll star. Big. And to do a disco thing. And I read a quote where he said that he really thought it was next. He may be right. Maybe he is right, But how do I fit into that? And how does Aretha Franklin fit into that? How does Stevie fit in? How does Paul Simon fit into that? How does James Taylor fit into that? What's going to happen? James Taylor's doing a version of Up on the Roof, very much like he did Handyman. That's not disco. What are they going to do with that at Warner Brothers? I mean, really?
But for James Taylor to do a disco song, some people doing disco is silly,
I feel that way about myself, though. I really do. I mean, to do a disco song just because it's a disco song. That tune that I did, Independent Man, on the last album, Michael Massa wrote for me. He and Jerry Goffin and I went to 54 with Clive Davis. It was a big, fun night. Michael had never been to a disco. Michael wrote Touch Me in the Morning and the theme from Mahogany and The Greatest Love of All. So you know the kind of writer he is. And very serious. I mean, real serious, Jewish person who has no time to waste at discos. And he and Jerry was sitting up there half asleep, and Clive, of course, is bouncing around being social. And I'm sitting there, and Michael said, "Come on, let's dance." I said, "Dance?" He said, "Yes, let's dance." I said, "Dance." Right. And we get up and we start moving, and he said, "This is fun." I said, "Do you like it?" He said, "Yeah." And so we had 2 more dances, and before we know it, we're both sweating and laughing and getting into the swing of the disco experience. And he said to me, "I'm going to write a disco song." Well, I knew that any song that Michael wrote was going to have some meaning and probably wouldn't be a big disco smash for that reason, And it was just cute. And we kept it as sophisticated and as pretty as we could, with all those little background things that we did. And the melody I thought was great, And, but I would not get into doing a disco song just for the sake of doing disco. Now, I have decided, though, that there is a pulse that disco represents, which is important. And I don't mean the pea soup thing that you get from the cymbals, But I mean that it means that everything is going faster. And you can't, just be consistent and be slow. You've got to go as fast as the thing is going, or you lose something in it, yourself. And I can't feel my music. First time ever I saw your face, for instance, when I do it on stage now, is a faster performance. It's not disco, and it's not rock, and it ain't rhythm and blues, and it's not funky, but it's much faster than it is on the record, and it still sounds slow to me and to everybody else because everything is moving a lot faster nowadays. And I think for somebody like James Taylor, Paul Simon, that's what it means, or me, that's what it means, that we hear music that is faster. I hear things that move, that have more rhythmic interest, and less harmonic interest. I'm still involved with melody and lyrics, which, sort of makes it impossible for me to do a big disco hit too, because the biggest disco hits are not the ones that make sense. Although with Gloria Gaynor's new record, that's changed things a little bit too, because that sounds like a French art song, like one of those things that if Edith Piaf had been living, she could have sung with the same disco rhythm thing and probably done a great job. I will survive, as long as I know how to love, I know I'll stay alive. I mean, I love that. I love it, and the sameness of the melody, that little modal thing that it has, think that's really interesting. But of course, 95% of what you hear in the discos doesn't sound like that. But if it's going to last, it will have to, and I think that's where a person like myself, or Paul Simon, or James Taylor, or people who are more scientific in terms of their approach to music can really do something without feeling left out or having to worry about being dropped by the record company or whatever, because, we can attend to that. I can find a little spot in there for me without feeling like I've got to do what Donna Summer does very well, or what Gloria Gaynor does, If somebody had offered me that song that Gloria Gaynor sings, I would have sung it in a minute. I mean, because I just think it has an important message, and it's nice. It sounds very French to me. It doesn't sound, canned at all. It just sounds real original. And it's just because of melody. Now, if somebody else comes out with a minor thing and that has that sort of conversational quality to it, while the pea soup thing is going on underneath it, it's not going to be nearly as surprising or as entertaining as what she's done. I mean, in other words, I would do it if I can make some sort of contribution, come up with a song like that represents an improvement over where the state of disco music is right now. I would do that, But just to get out there and do a straight disco that anybody else could do, I couldn't do that.
I find it kind of dull after a while. It's kind of a disco backlash to it. A fellow named Jim Steinman who writes Meatloaf songs wrote a disco parody called "I Got Dance in My Pants."
I got dance in my pants and I want to ants.
I want to ants. That's a good idea. Back in with the early albums, when you started doing real well, you started getting a lot of awards. I remember.
Yes. Yeah.
Which ones were really meaningful?
All of them were. Particularly when I first started accumulating them. Of course, the Grammy Awards were very meaningful. I got several awards from countries, like overseas, that were meaningful to me because it made me aware that people all over the world were listening to my music, and they were very important awards. And I got lots of awards from churches and organizations like the NAACP, and I got the Entertainer of the Year award, that big award that they give, Got that once as a singer. And I mean, there were some that were extremely important. Now I must tell you that winning a Grammy is not important. It's not. And I have to think that I've reached that point in terms of my thinking about that, because I've never known what the criteria for winning one was. And when I did win, I was excited. But I still didn't know really why I had won, as opposed to, let's say, someone else. For instance, Stevie was saying to me the other day, Killing Me Softly, best song of the year, and Beat Me Out, was supposed to be You Are the Sunshine of My Life. And I said, you're right. I had to say that you're right, because I love You Are the Sunshine of My Life. I wish I had done that one, as well as Killing Me Softly. But I don't know why I won and he didn't. I really don't know. I don't know. I guess it's just a matter of choice and preference. And when you realize that it's somebody else's choice and not yours, or it's not the direct result of what you've done, but how people vote, it sort of kind of takes away the importance of it.
That's what I was asking about other ones that might be more meaningful, like an NAACP award might be a little bit more meaningful to you than...
Yes, all of those awards outside of the Grammys and the big record awards, gold albums and stuff. Yes, the ones that are lesser known or less popular were very important to me, because they also represented periods of accomplishment, in my development as an artist. I didn't get the NAACP award right away. It was an image award, which meant that after 2 or 3 years as a performer, my image as a performer was sufficient enough to impress this big organization over and against other people who probably had impressed them in different ways, and that my impression was the strongest and most valid one, and they gave me the award. I'm assuming that's why I got it. I mean, that's the way I accepted it anyway, and those were very meaningful. But the ones that people, I suppose, that our public assumes that we strive for, the Emmys, the Tonys, the Grammys, the Oscars, it's a very political kind of situation, and unless you're in a position to be supported, politically or economically, it's very unlikely that you're going to win one anyway. I mean, because there's no way in the world you can tell me that You Are the Sunshine of My Life is not as good a song as Killing Me Softly. How do you make that decision? Who makes that decision? I mean, who makes that decision? But they made it. They made it. And they made the year that I lost for Feel Like Making Love, it was Olivia Newton-John's I Honestly Love You. And nobody has done that song since. But there are 9,000 music versions of Feel Like Making Love, and everybody in the world has recorded it. So I don't know what it is that makes a great song as far as they're concerned. You see what I'm saying? And yet that is the thing in our business that most of our public assumes that we strive for. I mean, a lot of people have written me letters and said, why weren't you on the Grammys and blah, 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 and, why didn't you go, and what's happening, are you still recording? They think I'm dead because I wasn't nominated for anything, the Grammys, and I was nominated this year, but I decided not to go because I thought the categories that I was nominated in was just really ludicrous and sort of ridiculous, and that it would be a waste of my time. If they had offered to pay my way out here and back and stuff, I would have done it. But to fly out here to compete against Steely Dan, Olivia Newton-John, and John Travolta, Earth, Wind and Fire, and the Bee Gees, I thought, please, if I didn't win for Feel Like Making Love, no way in the world is Closer I Get to You going to win. So I'll just sit at home, and if I win, I'll be very sorry that I didn't go, because I would like to have accepted publicly on behalf of Donny and myself, but I had it figured out pretty well. I think, when you first win any kind of award as a performer, there's a tremendous kind of feeling there. And if in fact, it was a real, honest-to-goodness, critical appraisal, or if it represented an honest-to-goodness critical appraisal of your work at the end of a year, or your work for a given period of time, I'd still be excited about it. But I know that my chances for winning a Grammy are purely coincidental, and it's a matter of luck.
Yeah. What about, I remember you used to give open concerts in Washington, D.C. Were they like Good Neighbor Days or something?
They used to have, what did they call it? Summer in the Parks. And I did a lot of those. They'd have usually one big one that started on the grounds of the monument, free concerts, and you could expect to see 50, 60, 70,000 people there. And I would be one of maybe 3 or 4 people who would be entertaining. And then they'd have smaller programs on, the parks throughout the city, and I would do a number of those.
Did you do one specific one that was...
You talking about Human Kindness Day?
Was that it?
Well, this was the beginning of a program which unfortunately is no longer being dealt with in Washington. It was a day that they chose to honor a person in the city, in the arts, who by the direct result of what they had done had influenced the young people of the city, And of course, I was the first person that they chose to honor like that. And they had a big art contest. These kids did the most incredible posters, all about human kindness and what it meant to be kind and to be human and to be both of those at the same time. And then they honored Stevie, they honored Nina Simone, they honored Marvin Gaye. Stevie was the last one, and they had a big riot there the day they honored Stevie. And of course, they outlawed it forever. People looted and went through various and sundry other ugly changes. But that was that. I think that's what you're talking about there. And that was a big, big thing. There were about 80, 90,000 people there. It was big. They gave me the key to the city. It was interesting. It was fun. I did a concert. They loved it. It was nice. if the purpose was to honor me, then I was honored. I was truly honored and very, very happy about, the attention. But if it was for some other reason, which I began to hear through the grapevine that it was a little later, then I'm almost sorry that I was a part of that. And I think the proof that there was something wrong with it is that they were never allowed to resurrect it as an annual event. And it certainly was something, if its original purpose had they been able to hold on to that, it was worthwhile. There were so many young people in Washington who needed to feel like, they could get something for nothing. Get to see Stevie Wonder for nothing. Get to see Nina Simone. Get to see Marvin Gaye when his album What's Going On was, and Inner City Blues was the password of the day. I mean, to get to see that free and at the same time acknowledge the accomplishments of this person was a great combination, I mean, it worked. If that's that part of it worked, but the rest of it I just don't know about. I did that, and I did, as I said, those Summer in the Parks things, and a lot of free concerts around, the city. Not all of them that big. Most of them, usually about 1/10 or less.
I'd read about Human Kindness Day, but I started to turn out that way.
Yeah. It was very sad. Stevie was the last one
Yeah, I remember that one.
they honored.
How did you and Donny start working together? What got you into doing duets?
Jerry Wexler was responsible for the duets, and Donny and I started working together mainly because I respected his musicianship. I knew him before he went to Atlantic, and I was trying to bring him into Atlantic, and I asked to have him allowed to arrange some things for me. And at first they squawked about it because he wanted $300 an arrangement, and that was unheard of during those days, especially for somebody who never arranged. And I talked them into it after I performed and stood on my head and cried a little bit. And they allowed him to do that. So on my second album, which has Reverend Lee and Gone Away on it, Gone Away is his song, and Reverend Lee he arranged. And it was a great experience for both of us. Shortly after that, we did the joint album because Carole King came out with Tapestry, and You've Got a Friend was on there. Jerry Wexler thought it would be a great song for Donny and I to do together, and he was right. And he called me up and asked me to fly to New York one night. I did. Donny and I met in the studio about 12:30 in the morning, and by 3:30 we were through. We'd done it. We'd put the track down, and we did the vocals while we were, playing together. And that worked. Then the next thing to do was to do an album, which we did in a day and a half. That fast. I went to Chicago. We chose the songs. We worked on them. He did most of the arrangements. I was responsible for 2 or 3 things. And we went in just like that. Sang looking at each other like this. There was no you over there, separation, blah, blah, was it. And it was, most of those things were one take. The song on there, For All We Know, I talked Donny into doing. That was one of my contributions, that we should do something where just I sang and he played, or I played and he sang. And we agreed that it should be him, And I chose this song. He didn't want to do it. But I don't know if you've ever heard that version, For All We Know.
I think I have, yeah.
With him singing on it, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I mean, it's just incredible. And we did that with him standing there singing and me playing. It's unheard of today.
So few duets really last through the years, and there's always been classic duets. I think of Martin and Tammy and things. It's really nice.
Do you think people think of Donny and I in that regard? I have a feeling they do.
Yeah.
I really do, because a lot of musicians have walked with me and said, when are you and Donny going to do this? And there's no sound like the sound of your voice and Donny's voice together. I never heard that for a long, long time. But then when we did Closer, I Get to You, and I'd done my part over there like 3 months before, and it took us all of that time to sort of talk Donny into doing it, and we sent the tape to Chicago, and he put his voice on there, and it worked anyway. I thought, well, there's got to be something to that. And there is, of course. Most of my relationship and my involvement with Donny was out of respect for his tremendous genius, He was a genius, and I recognized that. Everything that I had learned as a musician, as a student of music, made me know that he had some real special, incredible gift. And I just wanted to be around that, It's good to be around people like that. And so I got as close to him as he would allow me to, which wasn't very close, unfortunately. And but musically, We shared a lot of experiences. We did a tour together that was just incredible. I mean, incredible. They did a film called Double Exposure of those concert dates. You should check that out sometime if you have a chance. It's really interesting. Real interesting. Really good.
Having that magic happen every night.
Please. You know, and there was such a spirit of, it's like being in the Olympics, you know, I guess what that's like. Because you know that everybody that comes there, that's involved, is not going to be the winner. But you hope that one of those things that you do is going to make a remarkable impression. And that's what I felt like I was doing when I worked with Donny. I was working the Olympics. Because, I mean, I knew that the ghetto was going to get him. When he said, talking about the ghetto, and had all of those 15,000 kids right up here on UCLA's campus singing with him, I knew that he had him. So what could I come out and do? They weren't going to sing first time ever with me, you know. And so you sort of dug into your musical thing, and you came out with all kinds of things, you know, as a musician that you could do. Played a little more piano, you know, sang a few extra embellishments, whatever, you know, to compete and to do it in a, you know, friendly, sort of secure kind of fashion.
It was nice to be on the spot like that. Really.
I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
You had some ridiculous musicians with you through the years.
Please.
Can you tell me about, because it's, I hadn't realized this, and Eric was giving me a rundown. It was just, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. I've worked with the best. I worked with people from Grady Tate and Ron Carter, Ralph McDonald, Richard T., Chuck Rainey, Eric Gale, Patty Austin,
For openers.
yes, just for openers, you know. I mean, all of these people, and I worked with them for a long time. Ralph McDonald was in my band for about 5 years. And Eric Gale was in my band for about 4 years. And Chuck Rainey was in my band for about 2 years, you know. And I played with Bernard Purdy. I don't mean just in recording situations, but I mean traveled with these people. Hugh McCracken, David Spinoza, you know. It just goes on and on and on. I mean,
It must be a great learning experience, right?
yeah. Well, I could never imagine playing with people who weren't better musicians than I was, or who weren't in a position to give me something, you know. I never felt that I could, you know, get a bunch of kids who had the ability but who needed to be trained and train them to do things. A lot of the music that I did in the beginning, I would simply play. I mean, as the jazz musician that I was then, I didn't think about charts and things. And so you had to be a really good musician. I mean, Ron Carter would say, play it again, play it again. And by the time you played it the second time, you played it one time down and said, and then right here, and he said, okay, play it again. And he was playing. Same thing with Grady Tate, because they were those are the kind of musicians they are. Incredible. They can do anything. And Ralph McDonald, I was praising Ralph McDonald not only as a musician but as a songwriter long before anybody knew that he had a musical sense. They had a tendency to look at percussionists as just conga players. Ralph is an incredible musician. I've never heard him sing, but I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't open up his mouth and record a song one day that was really good, because he has an incredible sense for music. While he was working with Harry Belafonte and doing all that stuff with me, he was writing songs like Where's the Love and lots of things that I've never recorded, trade winds that I did record, you know, that I don't even know if a lot of people know about, but then a lot of people do know about because they asked me why it was never released on an album. We just put it on the back of First Time Ever I Saw Your Face on the single, and people asked me to do that song a lot. So, and it's a great song. Great song. Would probably never be number one, but great piece of music, you know. And I mean, I've been real fortunate. Then there were some people whose names you may not know. People like Mike Smith, a drummer, white drummer out of Washington. He's originally from Pennsylvania. Excellent drummer. Eric Gravatt, who played with Weather Report, played in my band first. You ready for that? Eric Gravatt and Terry Plumeri, who is a musician, bass player out of Washington. Excellent musician. You know, jazz, but strictly jazz and strictly, you know, that kind of music as opposed to anything middle of the road pop. And
We need musicians that can sense especially if you're coming from jazz. I can sense where you're going to go with a song because I know it changes.
Sure, it changes every time. And that was the joy. That was the joy, not to have to do an arrangement, but to do a song that you could play and you could move on and you could take out and do things with. Yes, that was the thrill, indeed. And it was because of people like Ron Carter and Eric and Ralph and Chuck and Eric Gravatt and Bernard Purdy and those people like that, as well as the people that I played with, that I started out with, Bernard Sweetney, Louis Powers, people whose names you wouldn't even recognize, but they have tremendous history in the Washington, D.C. area as musicians. And I was real fortunate while I was developing my musical performance thing to work with the best musicians in Washington. You know what I mean? I didn't have to settle for anybody that couldn't bring something to me. I always had people who came to me and made a contribution. It was really, really good. I worked with Keita Betts, and who used to play for Ella Fitzgerald. You probably know. I mean, just lots of people.
Let me change tape.
Boring.
Indeed. For a couple of years there, you weren't making albums.
Hmm?
There were a couple of years there where you weren't making records.
What years didn't I make records? I did. I made them, but it took a long time. It just took a long time. The Feel Like Making Love thing was really funny because that was my first production, on myself. And I sort of stumbled into that. That was the year that Joel Dorn became a real producer and decided that he wanted more points, and I knew points for what? I mean, I knew nothing of that. We'd never had any conversations like that. And then all of a sudden, he had gone to the record company and they had balked at him and said, no go. And he was just determined to get what he was asking for, or, to leave the situation. And he left. And there I was in the middle of an album, And that was a growing period for me. I also felt a tremendous obligation to help some people that I felt were responsible for a lot of things that happened to me, and to give them the chances to do some of the things that they wanted to do that I thought they could do. One was Gene McDaniels, who wrote Feel Like Making Love, and all he wanted was a chance to produce that with me, or with Joel. And I asked Joel about letting him co-produce that tune, and Ralph McDonald wanted to co-produce a couple of things that he was doing. And he said yes, but he didn't mean yes. And of course all of this took a lot of time. I wound up doing the album myself, and I found it very difficult to wear both hats at the same time.
Yeah, I'm wondering how you can be objective producing yourself. It's kind of hard in a way.
Well, no, it isn't. I mean, you just do it. I don't want them to do the technical production anyway. But all the decisions that I make about the music, that I had made about the music, particularly up to that point, I had made anyway. I mean, I'd been doing it. I'd been choosing my own material, deciding how I wanted it to go, and Joel Dorn's job was just to sit there and make sure everything went down right. That was it. I mean, there was never any major artistic contribution that would have altered what I was going to do anyway. You understand what I'm saying? And so I felt that I could do it. And I did, except that I knew nothing about W-4 forms or filling out contracts, for the musicians, or who was it. I had never had to worry about that, and I continue not to worry about it, and it cost me a lot of money.
I can imagine.
In the process.
I'm sure you heard from the union.
Mm-hmm. And that was in 74 that we started that. The Feel Like Making Love came out, and I think the album came out in 75, something like that. But it took too long to do that. Then after that, I don't think that that I've missed a year recording. It's just taken me a year and a half to do the album, which I really don't think is bad, Alan. I think it's one of the reasons why I've been out here so long and people don't really think about how long I've been out here, because I've never overloaded, the radio stations or the record stores with my product. I don't do 2 albums a year. I can't do 2 albums a year. There's not 2 albums in me a year. And if I put out a second album, it's not going to be up to par. An example is the Joe Brooks thing, which I tried only because he was involved and it was a film, Right on the Heels of You Light Up My Life. And although I didn't think the film was very good and very artistic, I felt that the song was. And the conditions that we arranged to do that on were that I would be co-producing with him. Of course, that did not turn out to be true at all. And, well, he insisted on doing the whole thing himself. And the record company was concerned that he, I suppose, would not let me do it. They had put a lot of money into it at that point, and they wanted to make sure it got done.
This is the one where he wrote. This is the movie he wrote the songs, he acted in it, he produced and directed it, and probably did the lights and carried the.
And used non-union people and everything. No, yes, that was it, and it didn't turn out right, as you know, you can hear. But if I had been given artistically the chance to do a second album after Blue Lights in the Basement, I was ready. And it would have taken me a year to do another album, but it would have been great. It would have been as good, if not better, more than likely better than Blue Lights in the Basement, because I had sort of bridged the gap. I had found another group of people to work with, somebody that I could absolutely trust technically, to make sure everything was recorded and recorded properly, and to explain things to me so that I knew what I was doing. And I was going great guns. Blue Lights, you know, should have been a platinum album, except that we got into this Joe Brooks thing, which was not the wisest decision at all, you know. I don't want to be a 2-album-a-year artist. I don't think anybody that puts out two. I can't think of a person, a recording artist, who has released 2 albums a year that have done equally well. Rolling Stones don't release 2 albums a year. Paul Simon does. I mean, let's talk about the biggies who make the records. Does Donna Summer put out 2 albums a year?
Almost.
Does she?
That's not a lot. Elton John is the classic example of somebody putting out.
Too many.
1, 2, yeah.
Too many. And now where is he? Where is he musically? I mean, really, where is he musically? I'm sure he's financially secure, but where is he musically? You know, I don't want that to happen to me, and I'm sure a lot of people don't. You know, where's Stevie's album? You know, it takes as long as it takes you. That's what the comment I was making about artists. You know, and how no one puts those limits on artists, people who paint. I wish they wouldn't do. There's some real people out here in this music business, some real honest-to-goodness people who have to do it at their own pace. And once it's delivered, it's guaranteed. It's guaranteed.
There's another thing, too, which is that an artist is a limited natural resource. You know, like gold is expensive because there's not very much of it. It's
Right.
rare.
Mm-hmm.
And same with an artist. When an artist puts out an album a year, whatever, how long it takes to put out an album, it becomes, in a way, more valuable because there aren't 100 Roberta Flack albums a year.
Right. And if there were 2, it would be too many. It would be too many. I am contracted to release 2 albums a year, and before I leave the record company, I will, have lived up to my contract, or they won't let me go. It's like owing your soul to the company store. Literally owing your soul to the company store. You know, but I'd rather owe them than have them mess with it. And if my record company has been very kind to me in that regard. They would love for me to come out with 2 albums a year. I'm sure that are all quality, that all satisfy me and satisfy them too. I am unable to do that, but I will give them what I'm supposed to give them. And I do try to have something on everything that is, artistically up to my standards,
Part of it, too, is that an artist has to have time to experience life in order to do whatever, in order to create. I think that if it's all the road and it's all recording studios, that the conviction is necessary to put into a song just by experiencing life and meeting people and hanging out.
Right.
Playing pinball.
Yes, developing one's imagination. Or sifting through those things that you imagine and coming up with something that you can really make, into art. You can't, every time I hear a melody in my head, if I went into the studio and put it down, I could have 2 albums a year. Or 3 maybe. But I'm not willing to take that chance. I mean, even if I'd lost my recording contract, I wouldn't do it.
Are there things that you do so you can, in your life, that you can experience other things? Do you get away from the music business? Do you?
No. Unfortunately, I don't. I tried that one time, in terms of a relationship that I had with a person. And I found it very stifling and very depressing. It was almost like the period in Maria Callas's life when she those 3 or 4 years when she didn't sing and she didn't practice, and her nails were gorgeous and her skin was flawless, and she lost all this weight, and she was a beautiful woman. And when I can't think of the conductor's name, it might have been Zeffirelli or somebody was getting ready to do a new version of Tosca just for her, and they were trying to get her to come back. And she said she was ready to come back. And this man said, well, what have you been doing for 4 years? And she said, my dear, I've been trying to fulfill myself as a woman. You know, I do have to do that. And I think 4 years out of my life is not too much to give to that. Well, I think we all, if we're human, I mean, you can't just be an artist and that's all. I mean, being an artist is to translate into music or into art or into dance or into theater life as it is lived by yourself or other people anyway.
That's right.
Or as it is, or as you imagine it's lived. And if you don't have those experiences that you want to sing about, you can conjure up feelings and emotions and imagine how it might have been. But to really make it personal and creative and important, you have to experience that. So I allowed myself that little period in my life, just as she did, you know, and just as a lot of particularly women do. You know, I mean, they disappear and they come back pregnant. Laura Nero is an example, you know. Barbara Streisand is another one at a certain level, you know, who for the sake of being human will just say, now wait a minute, you know, I'm not a machine, and I have these other feelings that I have to take care of, I have to attend to, and I cannot do it 10 minutes a day. If I want to have a baby, I've got to sit down and plan that and deal with it and figure that out, and just like any other mother would want to do, you know. The fact that I'm Roberta Flack and a public entertainer doesn't mean that it's going to be any easier or any less important for me to attend to that, and if it takes time to do that, then I have to do that. I mean, you know, I allow myself some constant pleasures outside of music, but there are very few of them. And there's never been, except that one time, a long period where I just sort of let music be a part of my life instead of making it everything that my life represented, you know, as it does now and as it did before then. There was only that one little period when I just broke out and...
But usually that happens in periods when it's not fun for a while. Sometimes sometimes it just isn't fun. And so you do something else for a minute and come back.
Well, yes, that's a good time to do it, but you don't have to wait until it's not fun. I mean, with me, it wasn't a matter of music not being fun anymore. I just hadn't done these other things. I hadn't lived with anybody. I mean, my first husband and I were married and lived together probably 2 years before I started traveling. 3 years before I started traveling and moving out, and we were having that that tremendous communication problem as a direct result of him not wanting me to do this. And so I was gone. I was gone a lot, an awful lot. And we were married 7 years, but we were only together probably about 3 of those years. And I had never stayed with anybody, lived with somebody, and cooked and cleaned and, you know, done all those things that women like to do, too, you know. And so I did that, and I don't regret it. But now I try to allow time for a complete sort of day-to-day existence, which gives me some time for music, and that's priority. It's just a matter of priority anyway. You can have it all. I mean, you can do it all. I could probably be practicing all day and never play pinball, but I'm not going to let anybody take me away from the pinball machine. When I want to play pinball, it's like a bridge player, a person who plays bridge, you know, who comes home from working an 8-hour job or whatever and will get dressed and cook and entertain these people who play bridge because it's just exciting. I love it. It's a lot of fun. And I want that too. I also want to have a baby. You know, I really want that. And that's going to change my life tremendously, but I'm ready for that. And I'll still sing and I'll still play. I mean, people do it every day. You know, I'll do it.
I'm real high on babies. I got a 2-year-old.
Really? I want a baby so bad. I can taste it. I mean, really, you have no idea. It's an all-consuming passion right now. Really.
They're great.
Just one. If I could just, my own, you know, I mean, I just want to have this one baby. Boy.
You can borrow mine.
You don't really mean that, though, see. You don't mean that at all.
But one is fine. I think one is, I don't know.
They're great, aren't they?
It really is incredible.
Yeah.
Eric knows Daniel.
Yeah.
We'll tell you about that.
Yeah.
Daniel
Eric wants a child too, real bad.
It's incredible. There's no way. It totally changes your life, and it does complete you as a person. It's strange people say that,
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought that was nonsense.
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does.
You a good pinball player?
Yes. You want to take me on?
No.
There's a little place right up the street, Alan, if you'd like to go. I'll be glad to take you on. I love it.
Yeah?
Oh, I love it.
I understand. You're writing now.
Tunes. I'm writing, yes. I'm doing some writing. I've always wanted to write, and I know how to write, but I'm one of those real critical people. And I think I've become more critical because I've developed my career as a performer, as a person who interprets other people's music. And there's an art to that, too. I mean, that takes a real special kind of energy and talent, too, to interpret somebody else's song and make it the interpretation.
I always thought that was the most incredible talent, because you're taking somebody else's experience and you're filtering it through yourself and you're putting yourself into it.
But it's like being an actress or an actor. It's the same thing, and wherever you want to take it, if you can take it there convincingly enough, it'll work. And that's what makes you a good interpreter. And then, of course, I developed as a classical musician interpreting, the great works of these other people. So that was sort of kind of a natural thing for me. Now, writing was something I excelled in school at the college level. I could write melodies and stuff and do very well with it. But that was another kind of thing. With popular music, it's real crazy, because there are only so many notes in the scale anyway, and there are only so many sounds that are definable as pop music sounds. If it goes too far away from that, then it's something else, and if it goes into something else, it's not that. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So to sit down and write a pop tune, a tune that I can sing, or jazz tune, or country and western tune, is to sit down and write something, I think, that is so unique and so original that it doesn't sound like it's taking even a 4-bar phrase from any other tune. I have learned recently, over the last year or so, that that's not necessarily true, because there are only so many sounds in popular music and country and western and folk. I mean, and the point is to put it together in a way that makes it sound fresh and unique. And working with Eric Mercury has made it a lot easier, because he has it down pat as a songwriter, so to speak. I mean, he knows the formula. He talks about a story, and we'll be talking, and sometimes he'll say, "That's a song." I say, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." And I'll write it down, because if I think about it long enough, maybe even for just another minute, it is a song. If it's not a song, it's at least a song title, and it's a place to begin. And all you have to do is just have the courage to develop that and trust it. I mean, Stevie wrote a song for me in the studio the other night, just like that. He said, "I want to write this smash for you." And he sat down and wrote, "Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Don't make me wait too long." I mean, it was just so cute, and I saw it developing, and I said, "I can do that. I know I can do it." I knew when he wrote da 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 da, I knew that the answering phrase was going to be dee 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 da 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 da. I knew that. I heard it. There are only so many answers to musical questions melodically. You know what I'm saying? If you say da da da, it's got to be dee do da, or da 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 da, or some of those. I mean, scientifically, you know that it's got to be that, but to trust that, it's kind of hard when you're beginning as a writer.
You really got to have your confidence built up.
Shoo.
And you have to suspend your critical judgment.
Yes, and that's very hard to do, especially being an ex-teacher. Very hard to suspend your critical judgment of yourself and of other people, too. For me to go out and enjoy somebody else's performance is kind of hard. Not because I don't like them, but because I'm sitting there teaching, saying, I would have done this, that, and the other, or I don't know if I would be vamping that long, maybe whatever.
To give yourself grades on other songs and C minor.
Yeah.
Here I'm getting an A+.
Yeah. Oh, I know when it's an A+. And believe me, that does not happen often for me. And it's not because I'm too critical, it's just because I know what an A+ performance feels like. No matter what the tune is and what it sounds like. I know all of that. I know when the voice is steady and calm and in line as opposed to sounding like you're shifting gears. And sometimes you can't help but shift gears. It's the climate. I go to Las Vegas and I suffer, as everybody does. But I mean, I really suffer because I can hear what it's supposed to sound like and I'm completely unable to control it. Completely.
I would guess you're at kind of an interesting point in your career because you've been around long enough, released enough albums. You could go on releasing an album a year, forever, and playing certain dates a year, forever. But I also get the feeling that there's a lot still that you want to do, like developing writing and so on.
I do, and I'm going to. I am going to do that. And I think that's one of the good things about not overloading myself or overwhelming the public with, Roberta Flack records, because it gives me the opportunity to develop things that I can present later. And I am developing my writing skill, and on this album I will have a tune that I have written. You betcha sweet Bippy I will. I'm now ready to give that up. I won't have a whole album of 4 or 5 songs that sound like variations of the same song, but I will have at least one song there that represents my, writing, my composition, and I'm doing other things. I'm trying to develop as a producer of other people because I've always been able to tell when somebody was doing something right or when it sounded good, or to make a suggestion that it could improve, or simply to applaud in the right place. I've been able to use my musical knowledge and experience to make those kind of judgments, and so now I want to produce other people. That's what a good producer does.
A producer is like a teacher.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I want to do, so I'll be doing a lot of that. I'm going to be out here for a minute, and I'm also going to be recording. I know enough about voice to know that it's important to continue studying. So I continue studying voice. I have voice lessons all the time. And I'm able to keep my sound reasonably consistent, because of that. In spite of the fact that I grow older and that I've traveled all over the world and I'm real tired, I can call on those things that support me vocally so that I can be, reasonably consistent in terms of the kind of vocal performance I'm giving to any song.
What about acting?
Acting, I'm very interested in acting. I've always brought a certain level of theater to my performance because I've never been surrounded by a lot of trappings. I don't come out and fly through the air and, change costumes and have dancers around me and things like that. So I've used whatever I had to create a visual image of what I'm singing about, and to impart an emotional understanding of what it is that I'm doing too. And that is theater in its rawest form, I believe, And I think that's also what makes Barbra Streisand so good as an actress. I think I could do that. I really do. I think also that I could take direction very well, I just feel that I'm ready for that. And I was ready a long time ago. I was ready to do the Bessie Smith thing, and people thought, oh, you can't do that. But I mean, please, I grew up listening to blues singers, Lil Green, Bessie Smith, Billie Holiday. And of course I could do it, and would. And I'm very anxious and excited about some things that are sort of in the wind that will be sort of theatrical, not strictly theatrical or movie type things, but kind of sort of. I'm going to do a special in Israel. We went to Israel last year and had a really successful engagement, and they wanted me to come back this year to do some more concerts, but they wanted to film it for television, and they wanted to deal with it as what it is. They wanted to do an Easter special called Soul Child in the Promised Land, which I thought was very appropriate, and to have me singing certain things, in certain locations, would be a very nice kind of thing to do. And they were speaking of some scenic things that I would have to do, in connection with that, and I'm ready.
I heard that the first trip was kind of meaningful for you.
It was wonderful. The trip to Israel, as a first trip, was exciting from the get. But getting there, being a black person in Israel, a country that was surrounded by 5 basically black countries who wanted to get in and destroy, and to be in a situation like that where people praised you, as a black person and as a person who had made a contribution to the world. I mean, otherwise I wouldn't have been in Israel. It was unique. And I gave it all that I had, and in turn they gave it back to me like I've never had it before. And I've been all over the world, Yugoslavia, Poland, everywhere, and nowhere was it like that. In Israel, it was very special. Everybody that traveled with me had a wonderful time, gave 150% at all times, and the response was just incredible. It was unbelievable. They understood the music, we understood them, and we had a great time. It was really good. Did 3 concerts in a place called Caesarea, which used to be the place where they fed the Christians to the hungry lions. Well, now you can't imagine what that meant to somebody who was raised up in a family hearing that kind of stuff every week, and what it meant to be there singing my songs. I mean, I felt real special, real chosen, like it could have been any number of people. But here I was. And right at that moment, a very time in the history of Israel as a country and the surrounding, black countries, African countries, it was really interesting. And we sort of got caught up in the spirit of all that was happening. First we were a little afraid because you see all these armed people walking around, but then you just relax and realize. I mean, I would walk down the street and people would just walk up to me and touch me and then move away real quick, as though they thought I was going to turn around and do something. It was incredible. I've never had that kind of reaction to me. On the stage at Caesarea, the first show we did an hour and a half, 90 minutes straight. And that was supposed to be in the show. And I was dripping wet, and it was cold out there, and the place was jam-packed. And I came off the stage after doing 2 encores. The band played a little longer. I went downstairs into the pits, which is where they have the dressing rooms. And it smelled like it, too, I mean, it's really, you could smell this terrible, terrible urine odor. And I went down and I changed. I said, listen, let's get out of here. And I took all of my clothes off, all of my makeup off, And all of a sudden, my secretary comes in and says, Roberta, do you hear that? I said, what? She said, that sound. I said, what is it? She said, that's the people applauding. They haven't stopped. They want you to come back. I said, Alvinia, I can't come back, She said, you got to do something. So I put my gown back on, no makeup, no stockings, no shoes. I went back out on the stage and did one more number. And I said, listen, this is it. And they just screamed. And they started calling out songs. Bridge Over Troubled Waters, which I hadn't done in about 3 years, got the most requests. So I did Bridge Over Troubled Waters. And I saw my band come back on stage. I mean, and people who had been traveling with me for 4 years, because it was that moment. It was so magical and so important. I mean, here I was doing a song that I hadn't done in 3 years for people who would not let me go 25 minutes after I'd finished an hour and a half show. That, for me, I mean, I'm not the Rolling Stones. People don't really riot when I sing, It was overwhelming. And then we did 2 more nights there. And I don't have to tell you that it was just incredible. People bought picnics, baskets, and they were selling T-shirts and posters. And I thought, this can't be me. But it was me. And it was in Israel. It wasn't in the States. It wasn't in, London, or any of those cosmopolitan places. It was in Israel. And it was a real trip.
People say that even in the Holy Land, even the molecules are different.
Yes.
Everything feels different.
Everything feels different. It's an incredible feeling. If you've never been there, you have to go.
I want to go back.
You must go. I talked with kids who lived in kibbutzes, and I talked to different factions. I mean, all kinds of political kibbutz things are set up there. And I talked to all of these kids, and they all had the same kind of thing that originally attracted them to this place in the first place. Then once they got there, of course, they took sides, and took special issues that they wanted to try to pursue, and did that. But it was real interesting. I mean, real interesting. And they treated me like I was just royalty. I mean, and there was no, she's a black and she's in our country and let's be, none of that. I had lunch with the wife of the president, Miss Navone. I think her name is Navone or something. I think that was her name. And we talked about establishing a seminar or some sort of group or something that would tend to the talented Israeli youth, who want to go into pop music. They have such a thing that was started by Isaac Perlman for classical, students. But nothing for people who want to, compete and who want to really get in there and have a place to go and play and study their instruments and develop and start writing songs. I know that there's some great songwriters in Israel. I know that. And they're Arab as well as Israeli. as well as Jewish, and I just felt that music deserved a chance to be a part of the lives of these people because they wanted it so much. I mean, they tell me that Paul Simon's concerts were sold out within an hour after they announced that he was coming there. And the same thing with Joan Baez and everybody else who's been there. They're just dying to make contact with people who do really good music. And my experience there was just completely a 360-degree thing for me. I not only sang and performed, but I was, as I said, I had a meeting with the wife of the president and was treated like royalty everywhere we went. The most gorgeous Israeli bodyguards in the world walked with me wherever I went. And I just loved that, It was really, really nice. It was fine. It was fun.
If
You want some more water? How about some more water?
Yeah.
A big thing.
Well, back when you were a kid growing up, right? You did down to like a palm reader or something. Looked in your palm and you said, "You're going to grow up to be Roberta Flack, and you're going to have these albums, and you're going to know who you are, and you get to go to Israel, and you get to do all this stuff, and right, you'll fulfill this." Would you have believed it?
No. Not at all. Except that I had one cue, or one clue, rather. I had one clue, which came from my piano teacher. I started studying piano at Howard University before I entered the school. This lady's name was Hazel Harrison, and she was a great exponent of Bach. She had, in fact, studied with Busoni. She was a real old lady, and Busoni was one of the great interpreters of Bach. And she had studied with him, and she said to me, "Roberta, if you will love music and practice real hard, it will take you where nothing else will." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you get to go everywhere in the world, and you'll never have to want for anything." Now, being black and, limited in terms of what, you could imagine having one day, that was the little thing that I needed to hear. That sort of opened up my imagination. Well, one of these days I'll be in this hall, and I'll be in that hall, and I'll be there, and they'll be standing and throwing flowers, and it'll be me, if I just practice. So that was the only sort of kind of clue that I had, as a young person, that if I really worked hard, that I could do something with it. But I never ever felt that it wasn't going to happen, that something wasn't going to happen. And to tell you the truth, I've always been satisfied with whatever it was. When I was teaching school, I was really satisfied. I wasn't sitting there thinking, oh boy, this is not my stick. I need to be playing in a jazz club or whatever. I was there in time on time in the morning. I was the one who called rehearsals at 7 o'clock before school opened in the morning. And stayed afterwards, to have rehearsals, and taught my students, my junior high school students, the same repertoire in some ways that we learned at Howard University. I mean, the same great choral things I was trying to give them, because it was music for me, and that was the reward that I got. That was always the personal thing that I got out of it, that if I put everything into it, it was so satisfying for me. So where I went with it was just a matter of time and fate, I think. I could very easily have been the best choir director in Washington, D.C. And at the time that I was directing choirs in Washington, D.C., I was young, and I was not considered the best choir director. That was something to aim for. I conducted a concert version of Aida when I was 19 with this same man's voice students, I did Porgy and Bess. I conducted Porgy and Bess before I was 20, 21. The whole school, I had to know all of that. I mean, I had some really exciting things happening to me already. So there was no need to look into the future and wonder about what was happening. It was already happening. It really was. And it was very self-satisfying. I mean, to be able to sit down and play anything, anytime, anywhere, to be able to open up any kind of music and sight read it, or at least make a tremendous stab at it, was very rewarding. And I got a lot of attention as a result of that. So I never felt like there was something else out there for me to do that I might not get a chance to do, or I might get a chance to do if I was lucky. Never dawned on me. The album thing, all of that just sort of unfolded. It was no more exciting or any less exciting than any of the other things that I had experienced as a musician. Never at any time, honest to goodness. Never. And it still isn't, There are more mountains to climb and more things to do musically. I mean, there's the writing and I'm going to take some conducting classes. Now, I've taken conducting classes, but I want to be able to get out there the next time I do a symphony date, and I want to get up on the podium and conduct something that I've written. How about that? I mean, I think that's something to look forward to. If I don't get to do that, I won't be disappointed, because I'm sure that there's some other ventures or adventures out there that I will have an opportunity to get into as a musician, as long as I stay on top of it. That's the hard part, staying on top of it. Really, believe me. It's not the writing that frightens me or doing new things that fascinates me. It's being prepared to do whatever it is that comes along. Whatever it is, a musical play. George Faison, who choreographed The Wiz, and I are writing a musical play, believe it or not. We're doing it. We're actually doing it. We are actually doing it. It's not just something you sit and talk with over a cup of coffee, with somebody. It's not that. We're actually doing it, and it's working.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, we'll keep doing it.
I'm going to. Thank you, Allen.